Hi, my name's Mark, one of the pastors at Trillium. Last week I was watching a documentary, an hour-long documentary on the Battle of Midway. Midway was a battle fought between the Japanese and U.S. navies in 1942 during World War II, about 1,000 miles west of Hawaii. In the documentary, things went back and forth quite a few times. About 50 minutes into the documentary, I thought the Japanese were going to win. They had a great plan and great equipment and great crew and pilots. But 50 minutes later, about halfway through the documentary, I thought the Americans were going to win. And then 50 minutes later, it looked like the Japanese were going to win. I had to go right to the very end of the documentary, 55 minutes in, to find out that somehow the U.S. had got a lucky break. 50 of their planes lost in the Pacific Ocean had stumbled across the Japanese fleet at the perfect moment. And in 5 minutes, they sunk 4 of the Japanese aircraft carriers and had a huge victory out of it. If I had turned the documentary off at any point along the way, I would have got the wrong impression about how the battle turned out. And this happens, I think, all the time in life. We sometimes are tempted to turn the channel or turn the TV off or close the book up or turn away just a bit too soon in life. I knew this young kid who got himself into a heap of trouble. He was doing drugs. He was drinking a lot. He dropped out of high school, and then he committed armed robbery. And he got sent to jail, and he sent a whole wave through his family, of course. No one in that moment could have predicted that 10, 15 years later, he turned his life around, had become a successful engineer, and had launched himself into a successful career. You couldn't have predicted that in the moment with this kid when he was going off to jail for armed robbery. There was another episode to play in his life, at least one, that changed everything. I think of Robert Downey Jr. He was an actor who got himself into a heap of trouble 20 years ago. Drug charges, he went sent to jail, forced rehabilitation, and it looked like his career was done. No one in that moment could have predicted that 20 years later, he would become probably the most successful actor in the world. You couldn't have predicted that from the moment. Kurt Warner, when he graduated from college, did not get drafted by the NFL, and he went home, back to his hometown, and was working in a local grocery store for $5.50 an hour. No one in that moment could have predicted that 6 years later he would lead the St. Louis Rams to a Super Bowl victory and be the MVP for both the game and the league. You couldn't have known that in the moment when Kurt Warner was working in that local grocery store. Setbacks happen to us over and over again in life. Happens to us all the time. And there comes a point where we think that sometimes these setbacks have no comeback available to us. We can get knocked down in life and we won't be able to stand again. That happened in the Jesus story too. He gets knocked down. He gets a huge setback. He's killed on a cross as a political criminal by the Roman state. And it looks like his story is done, finished. The final episode is played out. A bit gruesome, but there it goes. Sometimes happens in life. 2 of the disciples are heading back from Jerusalem back to Emmaus, their hometown, on Easter morning. They think they've seen the final episode of Jesus. In fact, the irony of that story is that Jesus resurrected comes and walks beside them, and they end up talking together. See, Jesus has one thing on top of them that they don't know. They don't realize there's one more episode to go. They thought they had watched the last episode of the series, but there is one more episode to go that will change the whole story. It will change everything. You and I experience setbacks all the time in life, in our relationships, in our finances, our health, and a host of features of our life. It's tempting to believe that in that moment we are experiencing the final episode of it all. But it's not true. In Jesus, we realize and experience that setbacks, huge setbacks, nonetheless have come back embedded within them. In death, there is life. And this truth gets revealed to us in our own lives together. We have setbacks, but the promise of God is that there is a comeback for all of us in every circumstance. If it works in death, it will work anywhere. The Apostle Paul had this happen to him all the time. He was constantly experiencing setbacks in life, but he kept his attention focused on the final episode of the Jesus story: resurrection, restoration, the ultimate comeback. And his counsel to us is that when we ourselves get into those moments of setback in life, to keep our hearts and our minds focused on the final episode of Jesus. It will teach us the truth about what our final episode will look like in this moment and ultimately so.